welcome to Whiskey Politics. I'm Dave Sussman, your host and purveyor at whiskeypolitics.net on America's Voice News. And if you want to find us on America's Voice News, make sure you check us out on Roku, on Amazon Fire, on Apple TV, and of course, you can find us on YouTube. Don't forget to hit subscribe and the notification bell. And for your audio podcast, listen to us at the Ricochet Audio Network and all of your favorite podcast applications. A lot of news is going on right now regarding the Mueller investigation, and whether or not it's Michael Flynn, Paul Manafort, if we're talking about Michael Cohen, which was huge news last week, and now Roger Stone. And to discuss all of this and what is going on with the Mueller investigation and a little bit more of a perspective on Mueller is the author of a, well, let's call it a little bit of a bombshell book, the author of a book called Robert Mueller, Errand Boy for the New World Order. And this is a gentleman by the name of John Milkovich, who is a state senator from the great state of Louisiana. John, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's my privilege to be here, David. Thank you so much. And, you know, I guess my role is that of a political historian. You're the expert on current events, so hopefully between your expertise in current events and the fact that I've had the privilege to do some study in political history, maybe we can put this together and make some sense out of it together.
Well, let's hope so. You've got a lot of, well, to call it bombshells, to call it an overview of a history of Bob Mueller that goes back 30 years. And unfortunately, and I'll just say this up front, because the interview was scheduled in the last couple of days, I haven't had a chance to review the entire book, but as much research as I've done online, reading a lot about the book itself, what's in the book, I've watched some interviews with you, and read a lot of reviews, some great, some, you know, questioning certain things, and we're going to get through all of that today with you, and I'm very happy to have you here. But before we get started, for those folks outside of the great state of Louisiana that don't know much about you, they will be surprised to learn that you are a Democrat. And in the state legislature, you are probably one of the most conservative Democrats, and correct me if I'm wrong here, not just in Louisiana, but probably across the country. Is that something that you would say represents your position today?
Well, we're a little bit old school. You know, when we ran, we said we were running on Bible principles and the United States Constitution. I think our purposes and priorities are more important than parties and partisanship. And I think every American should feel that way. But I consider myself an ordinary person. That's a fact. I'm a Christian. I'm a patriot. I'm American. So that's the way I look at things. Try to.
Yeah. You know, I remember Zell Miller from Georgia, and he considered himself one of the old school Democrats, blue dog, I think the term was. And we just don't see them anymore. Your positions are probably to the right of many Republicans today. I mean, you are pro-life, you're focused on different issues with your state specifically regarding going against Common Core. What do you say to those that are in the Democratic Party, consider themselves progressive today, that are trying to push the party further and further to the left? You know, the old saying is, you know, I didn't leave the Democratic Party, the Democratic Party left me. What are you seeing right now in your party?
Well, that's a great question. You know, I am old school, and back in the day, for example, when my grandmother was a Democrat in Butte, Montana, the court reporter, and knew every lawyer in the state, it was about a fair shake for working families. For example, that injured workers got a fair treatment in the workers' compensation system, that, you know, middle class is not overtaxed, that the middle class isn't bailing out billionaires, supporting welfare for Wall Street. Just, I think a fair shake for working people, and also the protection of individual rights. And I feel I am concerned, obviously, about the direction of the Democratic Party, and I'm not going to say everyone in Washington, but it seems like there's more than a few Democrats in Washington who are on the welfare state, abortion, atheism, and socialism route. And you know, that has nothing to do with the traditional Democratic Party. It's a total genetic freak. I'm sorry, but you know, I think it's an unfortunate direction. I think we need to get back, Republicans and Democrats. Let's do the right thing for working families, small businesses, professionals, the people that are paying all the taxes. And also, let me say this. Let's get back to God. Okay, that's where I am.
Okay. You're also pro Second Amendment. You know, we're seeing so many different things coming from the Democrats today that are really concerning to a lot of people. I consider myself right of center. You know, I'm a free market conservative, and I certainly aspire to those principles. You know, we're seeing a direction taken in this country, and it's probably going to mushroom in the next couple of years with the 2020 election, which has already begun in earnest with candidates throwing their hat in the ring. You know, are the old school Democrats, the blue dog Democrats, who else is out there like you today that exists that you can name?
Well, oh, that's a great question. Hey, Beverly Bruce used to be a state representative in Louisiana, and she represented part of the district that I represent now in the Louisiana Senate. Just a wonderful Catholic Christian lady who was 110% against abortion for working people. You know, she wasn't a union buster, and I understand unions can get, you know, do some wrong things, but, you know, huge corporations can too. And, you know, that's something that I would point to. Tragically, she's not in the, she's retired. But I'll say this, and I think you'd back me up. Across America, I would venture to say hundreds of thousands, if not a million or more, Democrats voted for President Trump. In the state of Louisiana, among the among people, maybe not so much, maybe not solely those among elected officials, but a lot of ordinary citizens that have a D behind their name probably voted for President Trump and believe in the same things that I do and many people do. It's faith, family, and hard work.
Great. Okay, let's move over to the book. We got a couple of minutes here before our first break, but you wrote a book about Robert Mueller that spans 30 years of history, and it puts Robert Mueller at the epicenter of some of the most poignant, and I mean, I look at this and I'm reading as much as I possibly can. Again, I apologize. I haven't, like 99% of the time I have a guest on, I've had a chance to read the book. So I do plan on reading it, and it looks like a really good read. But it almost put like Robert Mueller in the place of like Forrest Gump. I mean, you had him with Whitey Bulger and Ruby Ridge and 9/11 and Anthrax. I mean, every pivotal part of the past 30 years, the Pan Am Lockerbie flights. What made you want to write this book before we get into some of those details?
You know, maybe I'm doing this in reverse and getting a little bit out of sync with your question, but you can always stop me. This is your show. But I was having a conversation with a dear friend of mine today, and that I went to law school with. And, you know, he's kind of, he's probably conservative, but kind of a moderate. You know, he's probably doesn't self-identify as a Tea Party. He says he's watching TV, and it depicts 12 FBI officers. This is the description that he gave with me. I haven't seen the video. But he said 12 FBI officers with heavily armed, you know, bulletproof armor, and it looked like high-powered rifles and or automatic weapons, going to roust Roger Stone out of his house at 6 a.m. He's wearing pajamas, where he's living with his mother who's in her 90s or 100 years old. And he was appalled and disturbed. It's like, what is this, the SS? Are we going back to the Third Reich, the Gestapo? And I said all that to say this, Dave, excuse me. You know, Robert Mueller exemplifies the anti-values of the communists and the Nazis of the 20th century. And if you like, I can do a flyover of some of the cover-ups he's been involved in.
We will, right after the break. I definitely want to get into that as well with you. I'm interested in the genesis of why anybody wants to write a book to begin with. And that's kind of, you know, the purpose of that question to there. So if it's something you can answer in about 20 seconds, and then we're going to take our first break.
Well, I just saw Robert Mueller coming out against Trump. I know that Trump is an outsider. I know that he's pro-American freedom, independence, sovereignty. And that led me to believe that if Mueller was after him, Mueller was not a good guy. He's against American freedom, independence, and sovereignty. And it turns out he's been involved in corruption, cover-up, and collusion going back. And it started as an attempt. I saw multiple journalists addressing one aspect, one cover-up that Mueller was involved in. I thought, you know, someone needs to write an article, and I felt lit, you know, to try to do an article that put all the cover-ups together, and the article turned into a book.
Well, let's get into the book right after the break with John Milkovich, the author of Robert Mueller, Errand Boy for the New World Order. We'll be right back. Dave Sussman here at Whiskey Politics.
Thank you, Dave.
We're back with John Milkovich here at Whiskey Politics. I'm Dave Sussman, your host. And if you want to learn more about John's book as we start getting into this, I know you can find it everywhere, Amazon.com. We'll have a link up under this interview for you. Robert Mueller, the Errand Boy for the New World Order. Certainly in the title itself, it denotes your skepticism, I guess is an understatement, of Robert Mueller. You start off going all the way back to the 1980s. I mean, you're talking about Whitey Bulger in Boston and how Robert Mueller was involved in that investigation. How do you place him at all these different places?
Well, in the Whitey Bulger, we have Whitey Bulger is the operative chieftain or king of the Winter Hill mob in Boston. He's the mafioso kingpin for that area. Bunch of people dead. What's shocking about it is that the FBI was actually protecting this mobster. They were tipping him off to other local law enforcement investigations so that to keep him out of the courtroom and out of the jail. And according to one or more professional journalists, FBI agents actually assisted the Bulger gang in committing murders. Well, where is Robert Mueller in all of this? Dave, geographically and chronologically, he was right in the middle of it. You see, Whitey Bulger's reign of terror in Boston, 19 years. For over four of those years, about over 4-year period, Robert Mueller was first assistant U.S. attorney. He was then U.S. attorney. And what did this supposed preeminent federal law enforcement agent do about a mobster that's killing people and is being protected by the FBI? He didn't lift a finger, didn't raise his voice. He saw something, did nothing. He was later interviewed by I believe it was Kevin Cullen of the Boston newspaper, and about, look, what's your explanation for all this corruption? And you took a powder, or you were taking a nap for 4.5 years, and basically however many years. And Robert Mueller said, well, people need to understand that whatever happened a long time ago. In other words, this is my interpretation. We were crooked, but that's been a couple decades ago. Let's move on. And we can move on, Dave. If we can talk about Pan Am 103, one of the great tragedies of the 1980s, a flight that blows up over Lockerbie, a flight from London to America, blows up over Lockerbie, Scotland on December 21st, 1988. Very quickly, the international intelligence community knew who had done it. It was Ahmed Jibril, a Palestinian terrorist, paid by the Iranians, who had the bomb built. Mansour al-Qassar was a Syrian drug lord who had a network of paid-off baggage handlers working for the airline and he assisted in getting the bomb placed on board the plane. And then there were some corrupt CIA officials that knew what was happening and basically gave the green light and allowed it to happen. By the way, the CIA was also helping Al-Qassar traffic heroin from the Mideast to the United States. Here's a sub-story, or maybe the story. On that flight, United States Army Major Charles McKee, this is not conspiracy theory, this is all well-documented fact, Time magazine wrote about it. Charles McKee was literally flying on that flight from London to America to blow the whistle on the CIA's protection of a heroin trafficking ring bringing dope into America. So what do we have? Enter Robert Mueller to do a political cover-up. Jibril, he gets a pass. Al-Qassar, he gets a get-out-of-jail-free card. The crooked CIA folks, they get a mulligan. And, of course, he lets the guilty go free, but let's find some innocent people so it looks good to the media and we have a scapegoat. He targets 2 Libyan intelligence officers who honestly had about as much to do with the blowing up Pan Am 103 as the people that rode Ventura Highway. There we go. That's Robert Mueller. Let's move forward to Ruby Ridge. We know that the federal agent shot up the Weaver family, shot Dad, tried to kill him, but he moved at the last instant and simply seriously wounded him, shot his wife in the head while she's standing unarmed in the doorway of their home holding her 10-month-old infant daughter, shot, submachine gun his 14-year-old son to death in the back. while he was running from federal agents in what the family said was a federal ambush. Robert Mueller was incensed, but according to those people that were around him at the time, he wasn't incensed that federal agents shot up this family. Rather, he was incensed that anyone had the audacity to criticize federal agents for shooting up the Weaver family. BCCI. Am I boring you? I don't want to.
No, you're going through the list in your book here, so it's a good overview. I'd have some questions for you, but continue, please.
Sure. You stop me when.
Yeah.
Try to keep it very short. Bush 41, President Bush 41, brings Robert Mueller to cover in the BCCI banking scandal in which billionaire bankers were financing drug sales, terrorism, and illegal arms sales. Let's sweep it under the carpet, make sure the big boys don't get hammered. 9/11, very disturbing. Bush 43 appoints Robert Mueller to head the FBI 1 week before 9/11. And within days of 9/11, Robert Mueller is in flying in 12th gear, 0 to 90, helping fly the bin Ladens and Saudis out of America so they cannot be interviewed, interrogated, or investigated. But while Robert Mueller is shipping the bin Ladens and Saudis out of the United States after 9/11, and by the way, we now know that the Saudis provided networking, financing, funding, lodging, food, operational support for the hijackers. We know all that. While Mueller was shipping them out of the United States of America so they couldn't be investigated, he's rounding up a bunch of hapless immigrants in New York City, rounding them up, throwing them in jail, illegally detaining them for months. What did they have in common? They had nothing to do with 9/11. Here again is the hallmarks of a classic Mueller operation. Guilty go free, innocent get persecuted. By the way, he's manipulating the media the whole time. He said, he was telling the American public, I am doing something to investigate 9/11. Look at all these people I rounded up off the streets of New York and threw in jail. They may have had nothing to do with 9/11, but anyway, that's the game he's played. And since then, he aggressively fought efforts by Congress and the 9/11. There was two major commissions that investigated 9/11. He opposed them finding anything out, including there was a paid FBI informant that was providing lodging, networking, hosting a couple of terrorists in California, your neck of the woods. He tried to stop that from coming out. And when it came time to question that paid FBI informant who was hosting terrorists, hijackers that later participated in the 9/11 attacks, he helped make that witness unavailable. We can talk about the Anthrax attacks. I'm sorry, go ahead.
This is where my questions are going to come from, and we're going to certainly get into this after this next break here. But you're putting him at all of these different places of, like I said, in the past 30 years of these pivotal moments in American history. There's been a lot of discussion about each of these, events as they occurred, and the conspiracy theories. There's the mainstream news and the government official response to some of those theories. But in this book, what you've done is you've essentially placed him at the center of everything. What do you think his motivation has been? Where do you think, from your perspective, Robert Mueller's, his approach to things have come from? What was that genesis?
What a great question. In writing this book, if you ask the question, do I really understand who he is psychologically? I mean, for example, I have no evidence that he's formally in the Skull and Bones. I don't think he's a Yale guy. Who is he psychologically? I haven't been able to unravel that, but this is what we can say. I can say I see no appearance of morality. I see anti-morality. He doesn't care about walking on innocent people. He has a very great love for covert ops, even if they leave innocent people dead or innocent people in prison. He loves big oppressive government. One of the things, we didn't have a chance to get to it, is he's a crooked prosecutor. And someone called him, and I don't have her permission to quote her on this. Maybe she'll give it to me, but a wonderful lady in media called him the dirtiest cop on earth. He's incredibly corrupt, and I just don't see the morality. I don't see the moral constraints. I don't see the concern for human suffering. What we did not talk about very briefly, I'm sorry,
Yeah, well, I want to get into some of these other issues right after the break. Here we are with John Milkovich, State Senator from the great state of Louisiana, on his book Robert Mueller, Errand Boy for the New World Order, and we're going to get into some more specifics right here after the break. Dave Sussman, Whiskey Politics. And Dave Sussman back with you. I'm delighted to have with us State Senator from the great state of Louisiana, John Milkovich, who is talking about his book on Robert Mueller. A lot of folks are suggesting online that you're weaving these conspiracy theories throughout all of these great events in the past 30 years, pointing to Robert Mueller. Some folks have been celebrating the book. Others have been savage. There's a review from the Louisiana, is it the Bayou? I forget the name of the Bayou. I forget the name of the tribe, I guess the name. Anyway, it's a newspaper, and it takes apart the book. You know, listen, I'm like I said, I'm a right of center guy. I look at things usually through an economic prism when it comes to politics. I believe there's crazies on the left and there's crazies on the right. We see a lot of those folks that are online. I'm as somebody, and consider me somebody that doesn't buy into conspiracy theories. Okay, I believe that there needs to be a lot more than just somebody saying something on an internet forum to make it true. Some of these things that you're talking about with Anthrax and Whitey Bulger and everything that's putting Robert Mueller in, and I'm not suggesting I'm a big fan or a defender of Robert Mueller, but placing him at all of these events with a surreptitious motive to I don't know, deep state, to focus on protecting the CIA, whatever it may be, color me skeptical. Okay, talk me out of it.
Well, you know, the book contains 360 footnotes. Mm-hmm. The basic material for the book came from people, a lot of federal agents, including CIA, FBI, NSA agents. Comes from lawyers that have been litigating these international issues, including 9/11. It comes from mainstream media. There are we quote scores of times, or over a score of times in the book, stories that we get from mainstream media sources like CBS, NBC, ABC, CNN, MSNBC, Time Magazine, LA Times, New York Times, Washington Post, Huffington Post, and really soldiers, veterans, cops, David Graham, the highly decorated Vietnam War veteran that got poisoned when he was going with presenting his story, publishing his story about a cover-up of 9/11. Really, we're giving voice to the federal agents that are whistleblowers. We're giving voice to the soldiers and to the families of the 9/11 victims and to the veterans and the cops. And the investigators, the researchers. We're giving a voice to them and putting their information. Pan Am 103, there's been at least 4 or 5 excellent books, and we tried to cite all of them in our book, written on Pan Am 103. And the authors are coming to the same conclusions, and they're documenting the same facts. We're citing international experts, for example, on the anthrax. Robert Mueller says, well, Dr. Bruce Ivins did this. Well, what does Dr. Richard Spertzel say? What is he? Who is he? Well, was one of the top biowarfare experts for the United Nations and one of the top anthrax experts in the world. He says, look, there's 4 or 5 people that have the capability to produce the highly weaponized, chemically altered anthrax that was used in these mailings. He says Bruce Ivins, whom Mueller targeted, was not one of them. He goes on to say, I am. But he said, it would take me a year. I would have to have my own specialized staff to assist me. And of course, that implicit in all that is the top technological equipment probably in the world. So one of the top anthrax experts in the world said it would take him over a year with his own staff and the best equipment to create the anthrax, which Mueller accused Bruce Ivins of producing by himself in a few days.
Okay.
If we want to go further, and this is undisputed.
So on the anthrax, what are you implying that Mueller did? I mean, what was his motivation there? Who was he trying to protect in your mind?
Now, the facts are that his case against Dr. Bruce Ivins was a fraud. The fact is that Dr. Bruce Ivins ended up dead right as Mueller's, I mean, this is not a theory, this is a fact. Dr. Ivins ended up dead just as Mueller's flaky investigation was going to have to face public and judicial scrutiny. Of course, the official story, you've heard this before, suicide. Other people aren't quite so convinced of that. That's all facts. It's also a fact that I believe the FBI agent's name was Richard Lambert, actually was assigned to be in charge of the anthrax investigation. Did you know, as we like to say in Louisiana, he sued the FBI. He filed a whistleblower suit and said that basically Mueller's FBI covered up, undermined, sabotaged, subverted, derailed the anthrax investigation and covered up in evidence showing Dr. Bruce Ivins was innocent. Dr. Ivins, the handwriting, you know, the warnings or whatever the threat that was sent with anthrax, not his handwriting. There was no proof, zero proof that he was in the area from which the mailings were sent. And you know, what is the motive? Okay, well, everything I just told you is documented fact. Let's get into speculation. You can call this a theory. Why would Robert Mueller target an innocent guy who had nothing to do with the anthrax mailings? Well, is it because, as many of the leading experts in America, the laboratory experts, state that the only people that could have produced this anthrax would be a lab that was affiliated with intelligence agencies and/or the military. So maybe that looked a little bit bad, a little bit disturbing for their evidence to come out that potentially indicates a government lab may have been involved in the anthrax. Do I know that? I don't. My question to Robert Mueller, and I'd love to have a chance to talk to him, I sent him an email and asked for the opportunity to talk to him about his career with the DOJ and the FBI, and we never got a substantive response. I'd say, well, Mr. Mueller, obviously your case against Dr. Ivins was falling apart even before he died, and you didn't have to go to court. So who else could have done this other than a government lab? And of course, the anthrax, coincidentally or not, that happened just as people were beating the war drums to justify our military attack on Iraq. Check this out. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a fact. 15 of the 19 hijackers are from Saudi Arabia. We go to war against Iraq. That's cost the lives of 4,500 American soldiers, over 100,000 Iraqis, $1.6 trillion. So that part's the theory. Yeah. The fact that he brought here's another fact. This is no theory. Robert Mueller went to Congress and said, we need a surveillance state. What that means is we need the federal government to spy on every digital or telephonic conversation of every law-abiding citizen in America. We're going to spy on them. We're going to intercept them. We're going to capture them. We're going to store them. That's a documented fact. Documented fact. I guess what I would say is, if anyone thinks this is a conspiracy theory, why don't they come on air and debate me about it, and we'll go ahead and get the facts out there. Like the fact that Robert Mueller said that there was no advance warnings of 9/11. Come on, is there anybody in America that believes that? Not if you know how to read. The federal agents are the ones that said there was warning after warning after warning. The mainstream media said there's warning after warning after warning. It's the mainstream media that said there was in the last
minute before our final break, what would be his motivation of hiding that information? I mean, 9/11 was disastrous for everybody.
Mueller is a company man that's glued in to the people that want to, that the Bushes, the Clintons, Obamas, none of them like Trump. He is their man. He's their company man. He's a globalist deep state insider, in my view. And if you look at his record, he's covering up for the government. Bush 41 says cover up Pan Am 103. He does it. And by the way, what's the backstory on that? Well, apparently, this is Jack Anderson. Sound familiar? One of America's most famous columnists of the 20th century. He said, and I believe it was in the pages of the New York Times, that that Bush and Maggie Thatcher had a conversation right as Bush was fixing to go into the first war in Iraq, and he didn't want to get the Syrian Iranians ticked off by implicating them in blowing up Pan Am 103. So they said, we need to go in another direction. Enter Robert Mueller. All of a sudden, let's wipe off the table all the evidence that Syria and Iran were behind it. Let's go ahead and point it at 2 Libyan intelligence officers who, anyway.
All right. Well, we're going to take our final break here with John Milkovich talking about his book, Robert Mueller, Errand Boy for the New World Order, Democrat from the state of Louisiana. We'll be right back. Dave Sussman here at Whiskey Politics. And we're back, Whiskey Politics. Dave Sussman here, and again, America's Voice News. Find us on YouTube, Stitcher, Google Play, iTunes, and of course the Ricochet Audio Network. We're with John Milkovich, state senator from the state of Louisiana. I've been to Louisiana a few times. I've been not just to New Orleans. I've been to Shreveport. I've been to Monroe. I've been to Baton Rouge. I know the state fairly well. It's a great state. Let me ask you real quickly here before we continue on your book. What are people's reaction to you and your book and your thoughts on all of this in the state of Louisiana?
Well, you know, I haven't gotten a lot of feedback from elected officials, honestly, but ordinary citizens that have read the book and have said, look, I read it in one sitting, or thank you for writing this book. This needs to come out. You need to send this to members of Congress. And again, I'm not telling you that the book is great because of me. I will say the book is great because of the federal agents, the cops, the investigators, the researchers, the veterans that risked, as I said in the book, risked everything and sacrificed much to dig these facts out, fact by fact, document by document, chronological event by chronological event. So the short answer is the people are relating to it, and I give all the credit to Christ, my Savior, and to the people that did the backbreaking, dangerous work to break out these facts piece by piece by piece by piece, and we simply tried to assemble them.
Okay. So when you say the people that helped with putting together the facts on this, did you have a team of people, or was this all outsourcing to others in different media?
Well, you know, I think several members of my family helped me with you know, editing and research and our staff, but but also, you know, in the book, we specifically acknowledge, and I know I keep saying it over and over, the researchers, investigators, and federal agents that blew the whistle or dug up the facts. And that includes many independent journalists and some mainstream journalists. Also, I specifically acknowledged Dr. Jerome Corsi because the work that he did in depicting the Mueller deep state attempt to take out
Jerome
Donald Trump
Corsi is waiting for a knock on a door, just like Oliver Stone, Roger Stone received in the early hours, and he was obviously just arraigned at the federal courthouse. Is Jerome Corsi going away? Or what are we seeing with him? What's happening there?
Well, I think we need to pray for him. We need to support him. And because he has bowed up, that's a good Southern term for you, bowed up. Do y'all say that in California? We say it in Louisiana. Because he is bowed up against Robert Mueller, Robert Mueller is taking some risk if he tries to proceed to trial against Jerome Corsi, because Jerome Corsi has a tough lawyer. Of course, we have to pray for a fair federal judge. So if he does go to trial, the judge is allowing the jury to decide the case instead of manipulating the proceedings. And I feel like, you know, so a lot of Robert Mueller's credibility could be blown up if he tries to proceed against Jerome Corsi. Okay.
Let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing right now in the media, because, you know, it's nothing but Russian collusion for the past 2 years, practically since the election, before the election as well. It was brought out, and then we saw Mueller appointed to open this investigation of Russian collusion during the election. And you got Michael Flynn, you got Paul Manafort, you got Michael Cohen, who was the subject of an article that came out last week that was debunked by the Mueller office. Now, this was unprecedented as far as his office goes during this investigation. And he basically squashed this article, which suggested that Mueller was going to come out and point the finger at Trump and show proof of collusion there, and building a tower in Moscow and all of this. Were you surprised to see that report come out from the Mueller investigation?
Well, no, I mean, he's got a track record of 30 years of covering up major crimes. I don't believe he, all of a sudden took truth serum last week and started telling the truth. I don't believe that for a minute. What I think is more likely, and I don't know, but I subscribe to Dr. Corsi's view that what happened is he got caught leaking grand jury evidence directly to the media, which my understanding is against the law. And rather than him being implicated in a leak, which would destroy the credibility, or he potentially could be facing an indictment, and not that he would be arrested by 12 people in bulletproof vests with automatic weapons at 6 o'clock in the morning while he's in his pajamas. But to me, that's a very highly possible explanation, is that Mueller leaked to BuzzFeed and then he had to walk it back so he didn't get out there. And I think, the longer he continues his crooked operation, the Bible says this: there's nothing covered that shall not be revealed, and in that shall not be. It's going to come out.
So I guess I don't understand. You believe that there's a potential that the Mueller office leaked to BuzzFeed and then pulled it back within 24 hours?
Because they did not want to be implicated in a grand jury leak. So they leaked. BuzzFeed reported it, and I'm not sure if it was Dr. Corsi, whoever got the goods. I think he was concerned that if he tried to endorse that report or did not denounce it, that he would be implicated, that he could potentially be implicated in leaking grand jury evidence. So, and do I know that happened? I do not. I just feel like that is a very plausible. I think the suggestion that he was worried about being implicated in leaking evidence from a grand jury proceeding is a lot more viable than that all of a sudden he got credible and honorable. After 30 years, there's nothing that I would accept as truthful from this man, short of him starting to take a 10-year tour and going around the world and apologizing to the people whose lives he helped destroy, including the families of the victims of 9/11, Pan Am 103, and Whitey Bulger. He's got a lot of apologies to make.
We had Ken Starr on last week on our show. We had an investigation. For folks that haven't watched it, you can find that on America's Voice News, YouTube, and all of the podcast apps. One of the questions that I had from him was about Mueller and his impression. And Ken Starr's book, while he certainly takes reservation to the investigation and how it's basically diverting from its initial purpose, which is kind of ironic because that's what happened with the Starr investigation to begin with, he has nothing but respect for the man. He said that Mueller has nothing but integrity. How would you answer that?
Oh, I'd love to answer that with it. I'd love to cross-examine Ken Starr. Now, let's face it. I'm just a country lawyer. I'm a legislator in the Bible Belt. And I would ask him this: Ken Starr, did Robert Mueller state publicly, and I believe to Congress, that there was no advance warnings of 9/11? Ken Starr, was that true or was that a lie? Ken Starr, did Robert Mueller go to Congress and advocate, lobby, and push for a surveillance state in the United States of America where the federal government now has the legal authority to spy on every email conversation, every cell phone call, every regular call, every landline call, every text, every fax, every internet search? Is that true or false? Is it true, Mr. Starr, that the international observers that watched the Pan Am 103 trial and the prosecution of the two hapless Libyan intelligence officers said it was a disgrace, that it was a travesty of justice? Isn't that true, Ken Starr? Isn't it true, Ken Starr, that there was a DIA/United States Army major named Charles McKee who was on that flight that got blown up? Isn't it true, Ken Starr, that he was fixing to blow the whistle on CIA drug involvement, protecting a drug ring? I've got all kinds of questions for Ken Starr. Now, to the extent that he says some other things that are valid, that's fine. But if he wants to say that Robert Mueller is an honest guy, which a bunch of people in the establishment say, go ahead and answer some questions. Answer the questions that are not raised simply by my book, but that are raised by the scores of sources that we document in the book. So why don't we do this? We'll go ahead and We'll have a great show. You can have Ken Starr and me on at the same time, and he can tell us how great Robert Mueller is. And I've got about 40 questions for, I'll come up with about at least 40 questions for Mr. Starr, so he can explain to us why it's okay for Robert Mueller to be the top law enforcement officer in the United States and cover Russian collusion. If he wants to prosecute Russian collusion, what about when the Clintons helped transfer 20% of Americans' uranium ore interest to the Russians, and all of a sudden the people that were in those Russian companies are pouring over $100 million into the Clinton Cash Foundation? And by the way,
we had Peter Schweitzer on. We discussed that in great length, you know, his movie as well and book, Clinton Cash. Where was Robert Mueller involved in any of that?
Robert Mueller was the head of the FBI when that happened. Guess what he did to stop the transfer of uranium ore from America to the Russian interest? Absolutely nothing. What did he do to investigate the fact that the Clintons were getting scores of millions of dollars from people that had stock in these companies, the Russian companies that got the uranium ore? Absolutely nothing. And this is a fun fact to know and tell. Do you know who was a U.S. attorney? And by the way, a lot of the transfer of the uranium occurred in the state of Maryland. Guess who was a U.S. attorney in Maryland at the time that America's uranium ore interests were being transferred to the Russians? Rod Rosenstein. Familiar name? So Mueller and Rosenstein had the law enforcement responsibility to investigate major things like transferring 1/5 of America's uranium supply to Russia. They had the legal responsibility to investigate whether the Clintons were taking bribes. And by the way, there's a federal agency that has to okay these types of transfers of American assets to foreign companies. Yeah. Did Mueller talk to them? Did he have a press conference? Did he arrest? Did he investigate? Didn't do anything. And so Robert Mueller is very, very selective on what he chooses to prosecute. If it's politically incorrect, if it's an outsider like Donald Trump, he's all over it. But if it involves selling out America's uranium ore, or 270 people dying in the Pan Am 103, or the victims that got killed in Boston, or the people that are rotting in prison for things that Whitey Bulger did, he said that they should stay in jail. He said it was a travesty when the Libyan intelligence officer who was dying of cancer got released from prison. Well, you know, Robert Mueller is, I'd love it. You know, this would be the home run, Dave.
Last couple of minutes for you. So my last question, and that is this.
I'm sorry, you got me fired up.
Yeah. You're pointing to, obviously, the players, the upper echelons of the CIA, the FBI, you know, different state attorney generals. These are the players that we see at the upper echelons of today's government because they've been there for so long. How much of this, as one of the critics of the book suggested, is a lot of different threads to different events that you've tried to weave into one thing, but there's no there. It just happens to be that these happen to be the people, the same people that were at the upper echelon of that government structure at that time.
What a remarkable coincidence that BCCI is a cover-up, Mueller heads the investigation. What an incredible coincidence that Pan Am 103, a cover-up, Mueller heavily involved in that investigation. What an incredible coincidence that Anthrax was a cover-up, Mueller was leading that, had charge over that investigation. What an amazing coincidence that in Maryland, the uranium interests are being transferred from American interests to the Russians, and Mueller does nothing. What an amazing coincidence that the Clintons are enriching themselves by over $100 million while Mueller is the head of the FBI. He does nothing. What an amazing coincidence that Mueller is there flying the bin Ladens and Saudis out of the United States of America. And I guess it's just another coincidence that when Jerome Corsi is questioned, Mueller was spying on his family and threatened legal proceedings against his stepson. Here's another coincidence or not. General Flynn was told, basically driven into bankruptcy, trying to protect himself before he pled guilty, and they threatened legal proceedings against his son. All I see on Mueller is one crooked stunt after another. And listen, If you want to bring other people on your show that want to argue and have debate with me about whether, Robert Mueller being the straight arrow Eagle Scout, Dudley Do-Right, I think that'd be a great show. And there's a bunch of questions that I would like to answer.
Well, let's talk about doing that down the road, because we got to finish up here real quickly. Where can folks find your book?
Dave, thank you so much for allowing me to be on your show. You're so professional. You're so courteous. I love the way you handle yourself. Robert Mueller, errandboy.com. That's Robert Mueller, errandboy.com. And look, if you get the book, and by the way, I'm happy to mail you. I need to mail you a copy. If you get the book and you read it and you say, John, this doesn't add up, or that doesn't add up, I'll be happy to answer your questions to the best of my ability. I will say that we tried to cite and source virtually every fact assertion that we made, and they came from independent researchers. By the way, it was a federal agent, CIA agent, that said after Pan Am 103, he went on record and said, all of the rank and file CIA knew almost immediately who performed that bombing.
We're going to have to check more of this stuff out. State Senator John Milkovich, greatly appreciate you taking the time, sir. Check out his book, Robert Mueller, Errand Boy for the New World Order, and follow up. We'll love to hear more about this, especially as what happens with the Mueller investigation, as it seems to be coming to a head here pretty soon. So again, very special thanks to John Milkovich and Dave Sussman here, Whiskey Politics. Don't forget to hit subscribe on YouTube. Follow us at America's Voice News, all of your favorite podcast applications, and the Ricochet Audio Network. Thank you, John. Take care.